Funny but true story. A few minutes ago, I was trying to tape something I'm about to do now. And I'm talking and talking and talking and talking like I do. And as I look down at the phone on the bottom, I didn't hit the record button. Oh man, the senility of age. Anyway, I did have a thought, and I do have a thought right now. And it actually is pretty serious. Not necessarily politics wise, but essentially it has something to do with what I feel the Bible is predicting. And it shows me just how more and more accurate the Bible happens to be. We don't always know how things happen, but we will, as time goes on, understand that much of what John had a vision of, he couldn't explain it in any other way because he didn't know how 21st century technology was going to work. And some of you may understand or have a hint as to what I'm going to be talking about at this particular moment in time. And that is artificial intelligence, or AI. Now, before you start jumping on me as, you're so scared of it, you're so scared of it. Or you think the angels, do you think the machines are going to take over the whole world? Maybe they will and maybe they won't. But I'm not talking about it from a Terminator movie point of view. Many of you have seen the Terminator movies, whereas essentially the machines are fighting against the humans, and the machines begin to have sentient knowledge, and they decided that the best way the world's going to survive is if all humans are killed. And so they have various death machines, including the one that's dressed like Arnold Schwarzenegger, then the other one like Robert Patrick, and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. But I'm not talking about that. That's one thing. And of course that can cause problems too. But there are certain things that are going on right now at this very moment that we are accepting and have to accept. The reason why we have to accept it is because otherwise productivity goes down, companies will begin to falter. Because remember, companies always have to make profits and ever increasing profits for them to attract shareholders. Shareholders then pump money into the company. And so the company then takes that money and invests in not only machines, but in processes that are more streamlined, cost less money, and are more efficient. That essentially is the ideal of capitalism. And capitalism, because it depends on the greed of man, because essentially we either want to pay less for what we receive or buy more or charge more for what we sell. That's just the nature of business. Very few people, I'm going to give you this below price because I just love you. And in fact, you know what? Everybody does that. You'll be out of business very soon. So it's not necessarily greed, but essentially it does act upon the idea of you have to charge a certain amount of money and you have to pay a certain amount of money. So essentially, AI helps with that because AI helps to gather a lot of data from various places to be used for various purposes. I was reading a story today in the city of Chandler, Arizona. It was very close to Phoenix. And I was reading about how, and this happened not just Chandler, but all over the country right now, You have these huge warehouses now that store nothing but computers, rows upon rows upon rows of computers, adding their power together in order for them to be able to pull all the data that they need to initiate and to continue artificial intelligence. As you know, intelligence in humans, you may think is very crude, but it really is not. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. God made our brains of such sophistication that it's only now that computers are even starting to approach the power of being able to figure out complex problems with various solutions. We have used computers before to help make decisions, but we're the ones who make the decisions based upon the data that we receive. So now these companies are spending billions of dollars, sinking that into investments regarding huge warehouses full of these computers. And of course, these computers being that they're working 24/7 and they never rest, they're going to run hot. So it means you have to cool those computers. And as you can cool those computers, that means you have to then use a lot of energy, whether it's essentially from water and getting electricity, or whether it's from whatever source it is. You need a lot of power. And because these factories or these warehouses are so huge, they also take up a lot of land. They use water resources. Maybe in the Northwest and in the eastern part of the United States, water is not necessarily all that bad. You're constantly getting replenished by water, but not in Arizona. That's a desert in most other places. And Chandler is not in the forest, it's in the desert, next to Phoenix. And Tucson probably has to pull water from the same sources. And what you're looking at are areas that are essentially taking water from farmland and taking water from the metropolitan areas for drinking, for watering, for bathing, and all other types of things. But why are they doing this? They're doing this because they're attracting businesses to these places, which then, because of the power of AI, to be able to compute, not just compute numerically, but to figure out things, to do more nonlinear thinking, which is what we humans are very good at doing when we put our minds to it. Again, we're fearfully, wonderfully made. But man's attempt to equate the power of man's thinking, which costs money, because if you're going to use my brain, you have to give me money for it. Whereas if you sink a certain amount of startup funds, maybe billions of dollars, but once you've spent that money and it begins to work, then you don't have to pay them overtime. You don't have to pay their sick leave. You don't have to pay for vacation time while the computers go off on vacation somewhere. You don't have to worry about family medical leave. You don't have to worry about any of that type of stuff because essentially computers work 24/7. They don't have families, except for the things that are, I guess they may consider themselves families, but as far as we can tell, they're not families. And so what happens is that once they use this energy or use all this fuel, energy, whatever, what they need to do, now programs take this and sort it out in different ways that essentially makes it much easier for people to communicate, to figure out complex problems. In fact, people right now, if you look at Facebook and you look at the various in some of your posts, just look at the various answers. That's AI. They're asking questions and this is what they're listing based upon the data that they receive. And it actually is quite ingenious. Sometimes, even though they get the data, they have to understand bad data in, bad data out. You put data in that's not correct, you'll get data out that's not correct. But assuming it is, and you can watch over that data and compare, you can see that essentially there may come a time in the near future whereas the computers and AI will take over white collar jobs, not blue collar jobs. That's for robotics. And they do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again because that's what they need to do. They're making a product, maybe has different parts to it, but as they put the parts together, the same system goes over and over and over and over again. So essentially, you don't have the imperfections that you have in human beings. So you have essentially what is known as some perfection. Now, unless they have an inherent flaw, which then goes into all of their products, and now you have to have recalls. But let's say that no recalls. You don't have to pay factory workers. You don't have to pay, again, their salaries or anything like that. Now, when it gets to AI, now you're dealing with white-collar workers who thought that their jobs were free. I went to school for 4 years and for 8 years, actually. So I got my master's degree. We maybe got 2 master's degrees. Might even got my doctorate. And I did this now for these programs to take over your job. Don't care how many years of school you've done. These machines do it faster. And without the downside of being sick, of getting mad, they do what they're told and they do it very well. So what does that mean, Elder? There's 2 things that I'm pointing to now in Revelation. You may already know it, but let me say it anyway. The first thing comes from what is known as the 3rd seal in I believe this is chapter number 6. And it deals with the 3rd seal, which John envisions a horse, a black horse, and a rider on the black horse that's holding a pair of scales. And then they heard a voice saying, a measure of wheat for a penny, 5 measures of barley for a penny. Now, not mean the penny that we have today. The penny in that day was called a denarius, which was worth much more than what we call as a penny. In fact, it was the entire wage of a man working for one day. So all you're doing is paying the entire man's wage just to eat. And remember, 5 measures of barley, that's inferior food to wheat. You would prefer wheat. But then if you don't have wheat, you got to eat something. So you eat barley. It's more coarse. It is edible, but it's not as good. But let's say a measure of wheat for a whole day's labor and only enough for that man himself or for that woman herself. Not for the spouses, not for the children, not for those who may need to depend upon that person. It's not even talking about rent, not talking about utilities or anything of that particular nature. Meaning, many people are going to lose their jobs in the near future. But at the same time, the voice also said, see that thou hurt not the oil or the wine. Why is that? Because the oil and the wine represented items that the rich consumed. Don't hurt that. Let the money keep rolling. And if any of you have read about the various wealth of people, you've heard of some have calculated, for instance, Elon Musk is widely known as the richest man in the world right now because with including his ownership in companies like Tesla and Starlink and all those, he is worth almost $500 billion. In other words, $500 billion. That is 5, almost 5, followed by 11 zeros. We are happy when we get 3 zeros. 4 zeros, we're just rejoicing. 5 zeros, oh, we think we're rich. This is not even touching those who are making between 100 and 500 billion. They are making more than most states. Gross product. So you got all these people who will be losing money because they won't be needed anymore. But you have these people who are rich. And I thought before, at some time people were going to just start revolting because it's going to be horrible. Maybe they will, but they haven't done it yet. In fact, they put those who are making all that money in charge of our governments. Because they feel that if you can make this money, then you're able to take over a government. Not necessarily. In fact, many of them make their money from the government. So they take money away from those who have paid their taxes. Again, I'm not trying to be political. I'm just letting you know of how this AI is going to affect the economies of this world. And I can definitely see. Now, may not happen this way, possible, but there will be some way where the rich will only get richer and the poor will only get poorer. And everyone else will be trying to fight to stay alive. That's one instance of AI helping to fulfill Bible prophecy. The other one takes place in chapter 13 of Revelation, where we're dealing with the beast or the Antichrist. But it's not the beast that necessarily worries about. It is the image of the beast, or a statue of the beast, or representation of the beast, an unalive, something that is not made of flesh and blood, but of machines, but maybe made in a way that it looks real. Now, I used to think that this was talking about virtual reality, where you can get into a position where you can look at something look so real, and it looks like you're falling. You feel like you're falling, but you're not really falling, or you're jumping, and you're not really jumping. It's just how it feels. I thought it may be that. I thought maybe there'll be robots that will do that. But robots, essentially, even the ones that we have nowadays, many of them are pretty clunky. And they do one thing. And they do one thing over and over. And even we got, let's say, driverless cars now. But again, they're fed data, limited amount of data, but it has to deal with is essentially the route and who and what's around them, and if they can adjust their speeds in time to make sure they don't crash into people. And they do a pretty good job with it. But the crowning achievement, I believe, will be when they make an image or an idol or a statue, whatever you may want to call it, and make it look very realistic. People can make realistic statues, but they arm it with all the AI they can muster to make sure that the mouth moves in concert with the speech. Right now we see Disneyland. They do their animatronics, and you can tell that they're pretty crude, but they try their best. It's better than what they had. I guess now we expect more. But it's of that ilk, but it's even more beside, because you're using AI to determine how the muscles move, how the eyes move, how the mouth and facial expressions move, how then the legs and the arms, how they move. Because it says that this image will not only cause people to fall down and worship, but also cause as many as do not worship to kill them, which means that statue has to move, which is one of the things that essentially in the Old Testament, it was very clear. Idols don't move. They stay in the same spot, which is why you can make fun of them. They're idols. They're nothing. They're vanity. Well, this won't be vanity in that sense. It will move. It will move on its own locomotion based upon the data that's been given to it, and probably a pretty sophisticated power source. These things are happening, saints, and they're happening whether we know about it or not, which means that the Lord is coming soon. And every advance of technology means that the Lord is coming, means more certain that the Lord is coming within these next few years. I cannot tell you the exact day and time because Jesus said, no man knows the day nor the hour. I don't know why people continue to want to broadcast a day and an hour, and it never fails. It's not that day. It's not that hour. One of these days it may be, but stop announcing it. You're calling Jesus a liar. You're telling him that he doesn't know what he's talking about. But one day he will come, and it will clear the way for the completion of these AI projects that will cause a lot of upper level people to be rich beyond wildest dreams. But the vast majority of humanity have to fight for scraps. And then with the statue of the Antichrist, if you saw it move and kill people, wouldn't you be frightened out of your skull to see something like that? That's what John is seeing. And as I said just a few minutes ago, it's time for us saints to be ready now, not later, not in a few days, but now. Not trying to scare you, because essentially, maybe some other development may take place. Maybe it won't be in AI. But the key is we are now seeing how AI can be applied to these prophecies to make the prophecy real. That's the key. The possibility has now been increased exponentially until you can see it happening. Not possible, but probable. So just keep watching, keep looking, seeing if these things will happen as I've said. As I said, it may not. It may happen in another way. But in any case, the Lord is coming soon. Prepare to meet your King. God bless you. God keep you. Love you all in Jesus' name.